In the kingdom of Mali, there lived a young man named Musa who was destined for greatness. Now, not just for his intellectual acumen or musical talents. You see, Musa was being groomed to become the next king. Now, this would happen after he went through a series of rites of passages when he went through his 18th season of living. And as in many cultures, that might incorporate doing things like learning the rituals, the practices, the beliefs, or in some cases, it might involve some mystery or maybe even a little bit of magic. Well, the magic had worn out for me in Atlanta, Georgia back in 2013, and I was fresh out of patience with the city and in need of a new zip code. Now, for years, I wanted that zip code to be somewhere on the West Coast, but just didn't have the courage to do so. However, at that point in my life, I was burnt out with Atlanta, burnt out with what I was doing, and yes, burnt out with storytelling. So something had to change. Well, when I was telling a friend of mine about my midlife crisis and my decision, they said, hey, you better go ahead and do this now, because if you don't, you probably never will. And those words stuck with me. So I made up in my mind that by the following year, I would not be a resident of Atlanta, Georgia, and set the wheels in motion to do so. Now, I had two places in mind, either Las Vegas or Portland, Oregon. And I'd visited both and ultimately decided on Portland because I love the Pacific Northwest in nature, the creative atmosphere of the city, and I had a relative that lived close by. However, when I told my friends and specifically companions of color where I was moving, they had some concerns because many people know that Portland has about an 80% Caucasian population, which is why it's often dubbed the whitest city in America. And in fact, there were laws on the books that strongly encouraged people with my complexion to live elsewhere up until the 1920s. But I said, you know what? My friend is right. People, if I don't do this now, I never will. And people are going to be people wherever you go. So in March of 2014, I hopped in my 2003 Corolla and made that 3,000-mile journey to the wild, wild west. My destination, the PDX, which took me 4 days, 3 hotel stops, and $200 in gas as I traveled through many places I'd never seen, including the frozen tundra known as the great state of Wyoming. Whereupon during my 12-hour odyssey from sunup to sundown, I experienced every type of weather you can imagine, like fog, then snow, wind, then rain, sleet, then ice. As a matter of fact, a sheet of ice at the top of the Continental Divide. And at 8,000 feet above sea level, I found out I wasn't driving a car, but commandeering a bobsled I was being used to slide down the hill to safety. But it was worth it when I arrived in Portland because it was everything I remembered and everything I thought it would be. From the beautiful red Rosario Gardens to the expansive Columbia River Gorge, the serenity of Multnomah Falls, and the majestic Mount Hood in the shadows of the background. But it wasn't without its challenges. Well, the day arrived for Musa to face his own set of challenges on his 18th birthday. He and his father left the safe confines of their village and their home, and even the accompaniment of guards as they too traveled across many lands until they reached the vast landscape of the desert. Whereupon his father stopped, looked around, and took 2 fingers and sunk them into the ground. He made a circle. And then he instructed Musa, get inside the circle. Musa did as he was told and listened as his father said, my son, this is where you will go through your rite of passage. This is where everything you've learned over the years will become significant. All my teachings will become important. No matter what happens, do not leave the circle. Just remember, be brave and be bold, and nothing will move you. So Musa closed his eyes and said, be brave, be bold, and nothing will move me. Be brave, be bold, and nothing shall move me. He opened his eyes, and his father was gone. And he realized that the test would soon start. He sat there as the sun beamed down on the back of his neck and beads of sweat rolled to the base of his spine. When suddenly, off to the right, a line of smoke started coming towards him. And soon emerging from smoke was this huge rhinoceros with a horn heading directly towards to impale him. Without protection, without any weapons, Musa was defenseless. But then he remembered what his father had told him, and he closed his eyes and recited, "Be brave, be bold, and nothing shall move me. Be brave, be bold, and nothing shall move me." And he stood there as the ground trembled beneath him, as if the earth would open up and swallow him whole. And then just as it became unbearable, it stopped. He opened his eyes. The rhino was gone. And Musa took a sigh of relief. But he didn't have long to rest, for now, from the other side, came yet another line of smoke towards him, but it was moving differently, twisting and twirling and twisting and twirling, and emerging from the smoke was a huge viper with two razor-sharp fangs dripping with venom. Musa closed his eyes again and recited, "Be brave, be bold, and nothing shall move me. Be brave, be bold, and nothing shall move me." And he stood there, once again, firmly planted like the roots of the upside-down tree. And just as it seemed the earth again would open up and swallow him, it stopped. He opened his eyes, and the snake was gone. Musa wondered what would happen next. Well, his third test would come just before darkness fell. You see, off in the distance, he heard voices, familiar voices. And as he looked and peered, he made them out to be his mother and his sister. And it brought a smile about his face, which was soon converted to terror. For they're creeping off to the left, carefully, cautiously, and quietly. Wow! The lion, the king of the beast, poised and set to pounce. Musa tried to get their attention, but they couldn't see him. He tried to call out, but they couldn't hear him. And soon this predator would pounce on them and rip them to shreds. Musa had a decision to make. Should he leave the circle or stay put? Well, while I didn't face any wild animals in Portland, I did have a beast of burdens on my shoulder. You see, 1 year into my journey, I did get homesick and considered coming home. Little did I know there'd be a series of 3 events that would prompt me to make that decision sooner than expected. You see, in April of 2015, while in Portland, my sister died from colon cancer. 2 months later, just as I was about to go on a 10-gig library tour for a summer reading program, I ripped my Achilles heel. And just a few months after that, after finally finding a church to attend, my brother-in-law died suddenly of a heart attack. And due to timing, distance, and money, I couldn't make it home for the funeral. And although my family understood, that stuck with me for a while. And I realized I had to make a decision. Should I continue staying out west, or should I go back to be close to family? Musa made his decision. He leapt up out of the circle and went running towards his mother and sister, saying, "Get out of the way, move, move, you've got to move." His timing couldn't have been more perfect, for the lion leapt up in the air. Musa jumped at the same time, placing himself between his family and the animal, letting out a yell, "No!" And he fell to the ground. He looked up. The lion was gone. His family, not there. And Musa realized it had all been a mirage, but more than that, he left the circle. "Oh no," he said, "I left the circle. I left the circle." And he fell to his knees, weeping uncontrollably, until he felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up. It was his father. He says, "Father, I'm sorry. I failed you. I I failed. His father replied, you didn't fail me, my son. You see, when you stood before that rhino, you showed strength and courage. When you stood before the serpent, you showed your resistance, your perseverance. But when you threw caution to the wind to go save your family, you showed the compassion and sacrifice it takes to be a good leader. You didn't disappoint me, my son, or fail. You've exceeded every expectation I had for you. Come now, let's go home. And they did just that. They went home. And upon arrival, the people were in the streets chanting Musa's name, cheering him on, realizing that he's successfully gone through his rite of passage. And a feast was made for him, fit for a king, well, a soon-to-be king. For afterwards, Musa went to go sit with the wise men and the elders to watch, wait, and listen until it was time for him to leave. Well, clearly, I made the decision, like Musa, to come back home and be close to my family. But I don't regret that decision or even the one to go out to the West Coast in the first place, because I had reached a place of, well, sudden death, figuratively speaking, because it was a turning point. And it was time for me to reflect and reevaluate my life. And even though I came home a little sooner than expected, every time I think back and reflect back on my time out in the West Coast, it brings a smile to my face. And I remember all the connections and peoples that I made. Because one thing it reassured me is that while in life we know you can recycle paper and plastic and cardboard, the one thing you can't recycle is wasted time. And my time came when I returned home, where I came home with a new appetite for storytelling to feast on them. And after eating and getting my fill, now my time has come after watching and waiting and listening, because now I carry the cowtail switch in my storytelling organization and lead like Musa. Ashe. Thank you.